So now we should move on to our main event of this podcast. Canelo, Alvarez, Kayla Plant. We are just days away from having an undisputed super middleweight champion being crowned. My God, it's credit to Canelo Alvarez, who said a year ago, this is my plan. I'm fighting Callum Smith in December. And then 2021, I'm going to be fighting to get all 4 of the super middleweight titles. And he's about to do that. He got the win against Avni Yildirim in February, which was essentially a formality by that point. It was essentially a fight that was forced upon Canelo for taking the Callum Smith fight and having it be for the WBC title. Then he just completely dominated Billy Joe Saunders in May. The idea was to have the fight between Kayla Plant and Canelo Alvarez earlier this year, but they were not able to negotiate a fight in time that was acceptable for both parties for Mexican Independence Day weekend in September. So now we had November 6th as the new date. We're just days away, and this may arguably be the best fight at super middleweight. Boy, it really does not feel like this is a true 50-50 fight. And I like Kayla Plant. I've said this for a long time. I really do think Kayla Plant is really, really good. But Canelo Alvarez is perhaps fighting the best boxing of his career. He is getting better and better every single time out, which is unbelievable to say at this stage of his career. With all the experience he's accumulated, he's still getting better. He looked tremendous in the fight against Callum Smith last year. I mean, it was a dominant victory, but he did so with a tremendous game plan of, we're not going to attack the body. We're not going to aim upstairs. We're going to punish Callum Smith's forearms. And he did that. And it was just a one side, and Callum Smith couldn't throw anything. Then came the fight against Avni Yildirim, which, I mean, let's be honest, we all knew exactly how that fight was going to turn out. Avni Yildirim was going to only last a couple of rounds. That goes without saying. And then against Billy Joe Saunders, Canelo Alvarez just completely blitzed through anything that Saunders kind of threw at him. Saunders had very limited success, even before Carlos, the broken orbital bone.
Carlos, how big was that ring, too? That was a massive ring. And he still walked through Saunders.
Yeah. The build-up, the ring gate for that fight was... It was a little silly.
Wasn't it
because
like
it eventually amounted to nothing.
Was it like a 24-foot ring?
Yeah, something like that.
I've never seen that in a fight before. The biggest ring I ever saw was 22 feet. That's very impressive when you could beat a boxer who moves all the time and just blitz through him and almost blind him, despite the fact that you're damn near fighting in the park.
And Canelo is just so darn good at just about everything he does. Now, the thing about Kayla Plant that I like, but the thing that he hasn't really shown is, his ability to just be a buzzsaw and cut through opponents left and right. And he kind of did that early on in his world championship career. Go back to the fight against Jose Uzcategui, right, where there were moments where Kayla Plant would just completely breaking through anything and everything that Uzcategui was throwing at him. And then in his first title defense against Mike Lee, it was just a resounding performance. He kind of did it with a third round stoppage, and then he stops Vincent Feigenbutz in the 10th round, and then he dominated Caleb Truax in January, but he did not look great. I know he was hurt in that fight. He hurt I think it was his hands, and couldn't throw his full power. But even then, even knowing that, looking back, it still didn't look quite that impressive, because I thought, to me, this was a fight where Caleb Plant, at his best, he could have done the same thing he did to Mike Lee and just take him out in 3-4 short rounds. And he didn't. And it went all the way to the distance. Right now, boy, I know Caleb Plant is a very good boxer, but I don't think he's a good enough of a boxer to be able to beat a guy like Canelo Alvarez. I don't see Caleb Plant pulling something like a Floyd Mayweather and Erislan De Lara type of boxing performance to be able to get a chance to win on the scorecards.
Nah, I don't.
And offensively, I don't think he's as explosive as Gennady Golovkin to be able to make this into a slugfest where it could be 50-50. And he's not big enough like a Sergey Kovalev where he was winning rounds and and Canelo wasn't able to do much until he knocked out Sergey Kovalev. So it's like, every time I look at something that Caleb Plant is so good at doing, it immediately turns into also, well, Canelo's already faced fighters who are just as good, if not better, at what Caleb Plant can do in this regard, and he beat them. Or at the very least, Caleb Plant is not good enough in so-and-so regard, and being able to outbox Canelo Alvarez for 12 rounds and win on the scorecards. I gotta be honest, I'm looking at this fight and I think Canelo Alvarez is going to win with a late stoppage victory. We also do not know how great is that chin of Caleb Plant. We don't quite know. And he's going to get tested. And Canelo Alvarez is coming into this fight with a ton of confidence in his power. I mean, first of all, he could have stopped or knocked out Callum Smith if he wanted to, but that wasn't his plan. The plan was to take out his arms, and he did that. But discounting that, I mean, he's knocked out Sergey Kovalev. He destroyed Yildirim in 3 rounds. He broke Billy Joe Saunders' orbital bone and basically stopped him after 8 rounds. I mean, if I were a betting man, and clearly this weekend has proven that I'm not, I'll say that Canelo Alvarez is going to win this one with a very late stoppage victory and become the new undisputed super middleweight champion of the world.
I agree with you 1,000%. Exactly everything you said, I agree with. I have Canelo by 11th round stoppage. I think Caleb will get off to a nice start because we know Canelo's a slow starter. And Caleb might carry 3 of the first 5 rounds, but while he's doing that, Canelo's going to be banging that body. He's going to wear Caleb down, dominate the entire second half of the fight. You just made a great point. We don't know about Plant's chin, how he will deal with adversity. And Canelo, we already know what he does with adversity. And Caleb doesn't hit like Callum Smith hits. His punching power is not as great as Callum Smith. We saw what Callum Smith did in his last fight. He doesn't have the power to have Canelo respect him. And you know what? Who does? Because Canelo walked through Triple G's bombs. If Canelo could walk through Triple G's bombs, he could walk through anybody that he's facing at 168. I think the biggest test for him at 168 would be one of the 2 Davids, Benavidez or Morrell. Other than that, I don't see anybody beating him at 168. And I will continue with my prediction that the only guy I think with a legit shot at beating Canelo Alvarez at 168 or 175 is Dimitri Bivol. Canelo by 11th round TKO.
Yeah. I think I'm going to have to agree with you on that one. And I like this fight. I think this fight is going to be good. And I think it's going to be more competitive than Billy Joe Saunders and Callum Smith.
It's going to be a very good fight because Caleb comes to fight. Caleb's background is very, very interesting. He grew up as one of only 2 white families in a black community in Nashville, Tennessee. All right. So he had to deal with being bullied because he was white amongst blacks. He had to prove himself. There's even a video that you see, Carlos, of him fighting a bully when he was a teenager, and he beat the bully so bad the bully pulled a knife.
I didn't know what. I did not.
Do a Google search when you get a chance. Click young Kayla Plant bully, and you'll see that he's outside his house, and he looks about 16, 17, because he's very tall and skinny and with a baby face. The kid is fucking with Kayla because it's a black neighborhood, and he feels protected because he's a black kid picking on a white kid, and Caleb is dancing like Ali and smacking this kid whenever he wants to with jabs and rights, and he's holding back. He's not trying to hurt the kid, he's just trying to prove a point, and the kid gets so embarrassed that he pulls a knife, and that's when Caleb runs, and the other kids in the community stop the kid, grab the kid, take the knife from him. Very interesting video. And his mother was murdered by Nashville police.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So he's been through adversity his entire life, and also he's in an interracial marriage. You know the pressure, even in 2021, of being a white man married to a black woman. Both sides give him hell. So he's going through a lot. So he's going to give his 100% best because he's been through adversity personally. What about the ring? Canelo's a different story inside the ring, and Caleb will be a problem for first few rounds. But like you said, Carlos, as good as a boxer that Caleb Plant is, he's no Floyd Mayweather or Erislandy Lara when it comes to being a technician inside the ring.
Yeah, and to me,
and those are his two toughest fights of his career, Lara and Mayweather. He had huge problems trying to hit either of those guys.
And you can't even, and it's hard to even say that those are the fights that you can reasonably do a blueprint, and that's how you beat Canelo Alvarez, because I think Canelo Alvarez has improved drastically.
Those two fights made him a better fighter, made him a greater fighter.
So you can't even, I would argue that you can't even reliably rely on using film from those two fights, because I think, one, it's been so long, and two, Canelo's just that much better. He's much bigger. I think he has a lot more confidence in his boxing ability. I just don't think you can try to replicate what Lara and Mayweather did and hope that that's enough to do it. I think you have to do a lot more.
That's your bet. That's your only and best shot. Because as we saw with Triple G, you're not out slugging Canelo. That chin is too good.
Yes.
You're not knocking him out. So to slug with Canelo, Triple G had an advantage. That's why he went 12 rounds twice, because he's got a great chin, and you have to respect his power. Caleb doesn't have that type of power, and Caleb would be walking into a lion's den if he tried to do the same thing Triple G did and try to outslug Canelo. It's not going to work, because Canelo proved in his two fights against Triple G that he could fight backing up, which no one knew before that fight.
So I'm going to do a very quick rundown of the undercard, the pay-per-view undercard. Yeah, it's I will say this, on all I will say about this pay-per-view card is this is clearly a one-fight show.
Hey, for those that order the pay-per-view, if you're college football fans, watch all the college football you want to, because by the time it's over, the undercard will still be on.
Yeah, I mean, look, okay, and I gotta be fair. That's not the worst pay-per-view undercard. It's the co-main event that I have a real big problem with between Anthony Durrell and Marcos Hernandez. I think it'll be an interesting fight, but I would not necessarily say, that's worthy of being a pay-per-view co-main event. I would argue that the fight between Ray Vargas and Leonardo Baez, that's also on the pay-per-view card, deserves to be on the pay-per-view co-main event slot more, because you can at least try and see if you can sort of build to a potential Ray Vargas versus Gary Russell Jr. fight for next year that Showtime will more than likely have the rights to, have the broadcast rights to it. So you can potentially build to a very nice audience for that.
And by the way, the best thing about this fight being on Showtime pay-per-view is that the following week on Saturday night, they'll show the replay of the Canelo fight. So people who, if they missed the pay-per-view, they only have to wait a week to see the replay.
Yeah. So So Ray Vargas, Leonardo Baez could be a very interesting fight. Baez has been looking pretty good, pretty decent in getting 3 straight TKO victories ever since the loss to Jason Maloney and Carlos Caraballo in 2020 and this past March. Ray Vargas, interesting to see how he looks. He hasn't been in the ring since July of 2019 when he beat Tomoki Kameda. And, as we've seen during this pandemic, inactivity has been a very dangerous opponent for a lot of these fighters, especially at the top. We saw what it did to the 154 former world champions left and right throughout this pandemic. And Ray Vargas, as good as he is, I mean, this is a guy who, one, he's going to featherweight, which he has not done in a very, very long time. And I would say I say technically fighting above 122 pounds, because he hasn't been in a truly big fight at featherweight ever. This is essentially new territory for him. And look, if Leonardo Baez can get a timely punch here and then, he could cause a nasty cut. Vargas has paper thin skin. He's a guy that gets cut very easily in his fights, and if Vargas is not careful between the inactivity and a potentially dangerous and confident Leonardo Baez, we could see an upset brewing here on this fight. We also got on the undercard, also opening the pay-per-view card, actually, Elvis Rodriguez versus Juan Pablo Romero, which is a fascinating fight for me.
Elvis Rodriguez's career on the line at such a young age, it's a must-win.
Yeah, he got released by Top Rank after losing to Kenneth Sims Jr. back in May. And now he's essentially getting a brand new start fighting for PBC and fighting on a pay-per-view card, on a Canelo Alvarez pay-per-view card. So the pressure is on him to not just win, but to look impressive.
Yep.
Because people, if he doesn't look great, people are going to look at this and the Kenneth Sims Jr. fight, and they're going to come to the conclusion that Elvis Rodriguez is not as good as we were originally led to believe.
Exactly.
And he's going up against Juan Pablo Romero, who is unbeaten, who has been looking pretty good in his last few fights. Scored a very nice decision victory over Daniel Berrio. Got a win against a 35-fight veteran in Sergio Torres. There's a lot. This could be another potentially dangerous fight for Elvis Rodriguez. I would argue maybe even more dangerous than the Kenneth Sims Jr. fight. And I'm going to be honest. I need to see more from Elvis Rodriguez. He needs to convince me that he is as good as he was advertised at one point early in his career. Until then, I'm picking Juan Pablo Romero to get a decision victory over Elvis Rodriguez.
I feel the same way.
And going back to that co-main event, Anthony Durrell versus Marco Hernandez, I'm going to say this. I'll say Durrell wins this one with a very close decision because he's at the point of his career where every fight, no matter the opponent, is going to be life and death for him.
Durrell is past his prime. Durrell was never a great fighter. Durrell was a good fighter who fought beyond his talent capability because of hard work, and he would out-hustle you. The talent has slipped some, and the hard work and out-hustling is not enough. He'll win because he's a better fighter than Hernandez, but he will definitely struggle. Split decision win for Durrell. That's what I'm predicting.
Yeah. It has been 6-7 years since he was beating the likes of Sakio Bika and going toe-to-toe with Badu Jack. It's been that long. And
he's not the same fighter. It's funny. Andre has more left in the tank than Anthony. And Andre's taking some hellacious beatings. But Andre has more left in the tank than Anthony.
Yeah, and he didn't look that particularly well against Kyron Davis in his last fight.
That was a horrible fight, period. Oh, my God.
Yeah. By the way, credit to Kyron Davis because he's going to be fighting David Benavidez now. Very, very soon, because he's coming to replace Uzcategui, who failed the drug test, and now he's fighting David Benavidez on November 13th.
It is just ironic how these fighters face similar fighters. Benavidez failed, 2 drug tests in his career, and Jose winds up failing the drug test, and we've seen on tape Tank abuse his the mother of his child, grabbing her by the neck and caveman running her out of a theater, fighting an alleged sexual predator. It's just crazy how these guys fight similar people.
Notwithstanding, though, going back to, I think Canelo out. I think ultimately, we'll have a good pay-per-view, a decent pay-per-view undercard, and it won't be a spectacular one, just looking at these fights on paper, but they could all be interesting in one shape or form.
But it all comes down to the main event, and I see an exciting fight because we've talked about Caleb has a ton of heart, and he's got ability. Just not enough to beat Canelo, but enough to make it intriguing and for it to be an exciting fight. Because if you're going to try to beat Canelo, it's not. You have no choice but for it to be an exciting fight.
So, keeping things here on Fight Game Media, I am not entirely sure how deep our coverage of the fight will be. Obviously, next week, we will cover the fight. We will absolutely cover the fight and the event.
If you want to, I'm not working Saturday. We could do an immediate post-fight show. Just let me know.
We'll see. We'll see. We'll see what the big man Gary Gonzalez has to say.
I'm down for it. I'm down for it because it's the biggest fight of the rest of the year. I'm not working that night, and I'll be wide awake once the fight's over. Either way, and especially if God decides to make a miracle that night, which I doubt.
Well, I will. There will almost certainly be something written up on FightGameMedia.com regarding the result, and we will definitely have. There will be coverage of the fight in some way, shape, or form. We just gotta stay tuned and see what we got. So.